Hi, Johannes.
Hi.
So tell us a few words about yourself and about the tool you want to show us.
Yeah, sure. So thanks for having me. It means a lot to me. I'm Johannes. I'm one of the co-founders of Kern-AI. We are building something you might call the little brother or sister of Visual Studio Code, but for data-centric tasks. So, for instance, for natural language processing. I have a technical background, so I studied business information systems and data engineering, and basically had my first touch point with AI 6 years ago with this style transfer app, the predecessor of Delhi, if you like. And yeah, ever since fallen in love with AI and yeah, also open source.
Yeah, cool. You prepared a demo for us, didn't you?
Yeah, of course. Let me share the screen. I hope this works correctly. Need to move Zoom. Yeah, and I can already jump into. So what you see here is basically the screen you would also see if you would pip install it yourself. It's really like a tool and that focuses on building the best training data. So a lot from programmatic approach. At the moment, it's very much focused on labels. We want to extend to other data-centric tasks, so to say, also very soon. But generally, when you have a project and you want to build a training data for it for your use case, yeah, you could straightforward use it. And we have some sample projects, and we have one project that is our typical hello world, if you like, which is the clickbait use case. And I'm going to show that, and I think it's quite intuitive. Yeah,
So you do pip install and then you do something like kern start and then you have this UI, right? And then you can start labeling
exactly,
data.
exactly, exactly. If you
It's
pip
pretty cool.
install it, you have like the commands, and from the commands, it takes a few minutes to download everything. But yeah, you can then just start it and have it on your local host.
And now we will see an example of how to label clickbait things, right?
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Want to
Yeah.
see this.
So let
Cool.
me quickly show you what the data looks like, because I think this helps a lot to understand what I'm what I'm going to show you. Um, so it's really rather straightforward, and we use JSON as the data model for user defined data, basically. So in this case, I, as the user, have provided some running ID, really just to have it as a unique identifier, and a headline, right? So this could be really just scraped from any kind of news source like BuzzFeed or anything else. And my task now, and it's really, really straightforward, is just to label the data, right? Something we have to do quite often when we want to build some NLP classifier, for instance. And you can do this like with so many tools also manually. Like, so I could look into this, like these questions will tell you which US city you belong in. And I could say yes or no, for instance. Right. So this is like the manual labeling aspect, which I think is super, super relevant still. So we're not trying to get rid of manual labeling. I think it's still super important, but we try to label as few data as possible manually, so that we can show you which data is like most interesting, and which you can also hopefully automate for labeling. That's basically the goal that we have right now. And right, so as if you,
And yeah, this thing, so you already showed yes, and then it's 94% something, right? So you kind of show what you think the label is, and then you let the user say, okay, it is indeed yes, and then if it's not correct, right?
this is already the weekly supervised label, so the
Mm-hmm.
automated label. In this
Is it?
case, we already have it, and
Mm-hmm.
in so many cases, at first it's not there yet, but this is
Mm-hmm.
what you can automate, what you can
Mm-hmm.
program. And I
Is,
can just show you how that works. It's really
mm-hmm.
straightforward.
Is it
Uh,
this heuristic label that you have like a checkbox there? Is it it?
exactly, exactly,
Oh,
right.
cool.
So this is how you can basically program the label automation, so to say. And the idea of heuristics, as the name implies, they don't have to be perfect, and they can be basically any kind of source. So they can be super small Python labeling functions, that can be active learning models, can be models from Hugging Face that have like zero shot capability. Um, what we have not implemented yet, but what could or most likely will be implemented sometime next month, is that you could also have some crowd labeler as a heuristic, so to say. So it really just follows the interface that this heuristic takes as input a record and produces a label output. And it does not have to be perfect. That we'll look into in a second. Right? And like, for instance, let me show you one simple labeling function. Is that you could say, hey, I've seen that oftentimes if the record starts with a digit, it's clickbait. So it would be like 21 signs you are in love, or 50 ways to leave your lover, something like that. If you think about it, and you could basically program that. You say, hey, if the first token in my headline has the entity type cardinal, then I'm saying, yes, this is clickbait. So really simple, right? And because we have some manual label data that we can take as reference data, we can also estimate the precision, right? So we already know if this heuristic is rather good or not. And really just to show you, this can take different forms, right? So for instance, we also here have active learning heuristics where we have like template code, and you can just basically use some embedding, like for instance, from a transformer model, input it here, and using that already also have active learning heuristics, right? So ones that you don't have to actually program from scratch yourself, but that learn from the manually labeled data. And as mentioned,
quite interesting.
Yeah, it's also really fun to program these heuristics. I really like that. And now when you have like multiple of those heuristics, again, they are not always 100% perfect. They can be in some cases. They also don't have to cover every record. But once you have like a set of them, you can weekly supervise them, right? So this is just a process that combines those heuristics, and from the different sets you have, tries to create a denoised and automated label. And this is what we saw right here, right? So this is a weekly supervised label that is basically aggregated from the different heuristics we have, and which I can use to scale up my labeling. So that's really cool.
And then, so let's say I am labeling this, and then I see the default label, and then I can just press, I don't know, the space bar or something to accept this label, or how does it work?
For the weekly supervised ones?
Yeah.
That we don't have yet, but we want to do this, that you have like, that you can easily accept them. At the moment we have keyboard shortcuts like that you can say, hey, if I have yes and no, I can just, for instance, press Q or W to change the labels. But this is, yeah, there are so many ways how you can improve like the manual workflow if you have some automated suggestions. So we look into this, but at the moment it's just like this banner.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, and what's like also quite cool is that you can use those weekly supervised labels also not only to label something from scratch, like so if you have no labeled data yet, but also if you already have some labeled data and you want to make sure that you have a good quality, right? So if there are mislabeled data points and such. And you can use the overview basically to see like this typical confusion metrics, but in this case, you can actually debug the cases in which the predictions differ from the manually labeled data. And what we have for that is something like a data browser, so to say, which really just collects all the records that we have. And we have for them the metadata, like what is the manual label, what's the weekly supervised label, but also what did my heuristics say? I could now, for instance, dive into those records that, because I have my heuristics and they are basically like database indices, look into the ones that starts with a digit and maybe have some country-related data in them. Right, so, okay, maybe London is not the perfect country-related, but I have it basically in my lookup list. And with that, I can drill down into my records and see, for instance, the records that I still want to label or that make sense to label next. Like, for instance, what are the weekly supervised ones that I have that have a low confidence, right? So because maybe I need to change that. No and yes, but has no label. Now it's loading. Might take some time because it's a rather big query, but what are the records that I want to relabel in my data set or I want to look into? So it really helps me out to select the next records.
And the records that you have, they are already scored, right? So when you write this heuristic is applied to all the records, right? So this is when the moment when the heuristic is applied. So it's not at the query time, but at the heuristic creation time, right?
Exactly. And because of that, we can also use it basically as an index. So it's not only that we use it for weekly supervision, but also for basically data management. Yeah. And from there, basically, you can really build cool training data sets. You can look into the quality. Also, something cool is because you have multiple labeling tasks that you can set. So for instance, in this case, I have my clickbait case where I just want to binary label, is this clickbait, yes or no? Or I also want to maybe label some indications. So for instance, is something country related or a clickbait expression? If I want to label this, like for instance, in this case, where I want to collect all the country related instances, what this will do, it will create a lookup list with exactly those labeling tasks and collect those entries for me. And the cool thing about this is that I can just reuse those lookup lists in my heuristics. So for instance, let's say I've seen that if there's a country in the text, it's most likely a political debate, and that is oftentimes not clickbait. I can just use that lookup list by importing it and just looping over it. And as you mentioned beforehand, there are like certain things you can improve in the workflow, the manual workflow, if you have the capability to automate lots of things. And that's what we're heading towards. I think it's still a long way to go. So we're at version 1.0, but still have lots of tasks ahead of us. But I think this is something where the general user experience can be improved a lot.
I think you mentioned that it can also be not outsourced, but somehow moved to an external crowdsourcing platform, like, I don't know, Mechanical Turk or Toloco or something like this, right? How does this flow work?
Yeah, so like that's at the moment, this is what we want to build like in the next sprint, is that you can basically say, hey, I have some data slice, or I want to have this data being labeled manually by someone else. What we have seen in the past quite often is that even if the data labeling is being outsourced, the quality is not always that good, right? So you still have some issues, and you don't want to take the outsourced labeled data set as your golden standard. And with that approach, if you use them as if they were heuristics, you can see where they produce different results than your actually golden record set, and can estimate the data quality. And I think this has some chances for improvement, that we can use outsourced labeling basically as some source for heuristics, but also enrich those with other heuristics that we can think of programmatically, and maybe some active learning models. And that way create basically a scalable but also maintainable data set that has a good quality. That's the ultimate goal that we want to achieve.
And now when you do this exercise of labeling for a couple of iterations, you have a couple of the, I don't know, 1,000 examples, and then you export this data and then you train your model, right? How does this flow work? Do you have some sort of API that you, I don't know, from your Jupyter notebook, you say, okay, this is the data set I want to export, and then you just get it in your Jupyter, or you first export the CSV file and then read it with pandas?
Exactly, you can use a Python SDK that we have implemented. You can also use it straight from your terminal. So what we've seen sometimes in the past is that people loved DVC, like this kind of Git for data, if you like. And you can do something like refinery pull, which will pull the data to your local machine, and with DVC you can then create a version of it. But you could also just use the Python SDK to pull the data into your Jupyter notebook, and from there train your model. So it works in many ways.
Yeah, you mentioned DVC, which is interesting. So you don't do versioning yourself. You can delegate it to other tools that specialize in it, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think DVC is a great tool, and people already love it. So We didn't want to develop this completely on our own, but instead make use of great tools like this, for instance.
Yeah, pretty awesome. So how many people are working on this tool?
We are a team of 12 at the moment, and we've been working on this for quite some time. Yeah, we already have planned basically. At the moment, it is still quite label-centric, if you like. So a lot of the work is going or is about improving your label data. But what we think also has a lot of room for improvement when you work with data are things like your raw attribute structure, right? So if you could, for instance, change the structure of the headline or the structure of your emails, or maybe also something like embeddings. I think those are like one of the most fascinating things. And so, for instance, we use, I'm sure you're familiar with them because they also were guests in your series. We use Quadrant as a neural search engine, basically. And you can see, for instance, if I now want to find similar records using Quadrant, this just works like a charm. But you can even fine-tune the embeddings. So there are lots of things that you can improve from a data-centric perspective. And that's where we're heading with the team, basically.
Yeah, maybe you can show us how we can give you a star, because I see you have the tab open.
Yes, exactly.
So it's called kern-refinery, right?
Exactly, that's the repository. We went open source 2 weeks ago.
And then you already have 800 stars.
It was crazy. To be honest, we did not expect that. We prepared the launch like a lot, had some months of tireless work basically in advance, but the open source launch was like crazy.
How did you launch it? Did you get on the first page of Hacker News or?
Yeah, we were on Hacker News for a couple of hours, and we had some other platforms that we published on, where we had a couple of 10,000 views, and it was amazing. Those were like some crazy days when it launched, and we basically had some. The stars were not our goal. We wanted to create a community, so we were much more looking on people joining our Discord, for instance, which you're also welcome to do if you like. But we had like this idea, hey, if we reach 50 stars in the first week, then that's crazy, and we were super happy, and we had this by lunchtime at the first day.
Yeah. Well, stars also help with discoverability because you get into GitHub trending, right? And then, like, it's GitHub starts showing it to other users. And how can people find your Discord? I guess if you scroll down, then there is a link, right?
And here's the link, basically, on this button.
Yeah, it's so small. It's very hard to see it.
Maybe you have to make it a bit bigger.
And I saw that you already have quite a few issues. Right?
Yeah.
Are these issues for somebody, let's say if somebody wants to contribute, is it the place they go to find an issue, or how does it work? How do people help you?
Yeah, that's basically one way to look into that. What's also already like a very, very big contribution is basically to provide us feedback about the application, but also about the experience. So that helps us a lot. But generally anyone who wants to contribute, I think a good first step is maybe to join the Discord so we can get in touch and everything. We also want to show there what we're working on next. So we do a lot of mock-ups and ask people what they like about it, what they dislike about it, what next things we should implement, and there if we get in discussion, I think it would be already super great. And for the issues, for anybody who wants to look into this, also we're super happy about that.
Okay. I think you mentioned about your plans, because this is another question I ask. So yeah, I guess, do you have any advice for anyone who is watching this?
Yeah, I think generally there's so much going on in AI every day. So it's like a jungle basically of new things coming up every day. So that's really amazing. What we try to do is to help people in this data-centric area, because I think it's also very, very fresh, very new. And it's not only about labels. I mean, there are so many great technologies you can look into. But to just keep that in mind, that's a really cool and fascinating field. And for anyone who wants to dive deeper into this, it doesn't have to be related to the software. Like generally, the field is amazing. I would love to talk. I'm always happy about this, and yeah, to watch a lot of good series like yours to get to know about new tools. I think this helps a lot.
Yeah, it helps me too. Like I really like seeing these tools. Okay, I guess that's it for today. Thanks a lot, Johannes, for joining us today, for showing the tool, for telling about yourself. And I guess that's it. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks for having me.